Thank you, Maren, and thank you all for coming tonight. This week across Canada, women are taking to the streets to take back the night. We walk together to affirm our right to be safe wherever we go. In the streets, in our homes, in our workplaces, in public life, in sports and culture, in the parks, wherever we go. We march to say no means no and to demand that governments take up their social responsibility, as women have done and continue to do. We march for empowerment and for rights. We never ask the authorities for their permission to walk the streets together. We also don't accept how we're defined by those who wield power. We particularly reject being categorized as victims. Women are a formidable force who are in the front lines of the fight to defend the rights of all and bring into being the society we need, the society where all human beings can flourish. Such a society cannot come into being unless the needs of women and children are put in first place. Women have shown through their actions what they're made of. And tonight, as always, we emphasize that the women of Canada are playing a leading role for rights, for empowerment, and for peace, against the antisocial offensive and cuts to the programs and services that women in society need, and for our right to be safe wherever we are. We are loud and clear that no means no. We say yes to our demand for a society which puts an end to violence against women. We're not interested in empty words when every day the failure to uphold rights is a living nightmare. And I think that our speakers have made that point in a way that I never could. We know that what we have achieved through our own efforts, all of us together. And we know that the state institutions in Canada, the police, the courts, the justice system, continue to inflict violence and pain and injustice on women in Canada, in particular on Indigenous women. Of particular concern this year, again, is fulfilling the demands of Indigenous women, whose courageous and protracted fight brought about the national inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women. And as April Eve pointed out, the inquiry is an urgent call to action to end colonial justice. But there's inaction from government. There is no way that Indigenous women will let the report sit on the shelf gathering dust, as has happened so many times in the past. So we have a particular responsibility as Canadians to stand with Indigenous women and not let that happen and not permit it to go on. That once again, an inquiry which has shown that genocide against women, which has brought forward those recommendations, which came from the women themselves, that must be implemented, and governments must carry out their responsibilities as defined by the Indigenous women themselves and no one else. We also uphold the rights of women and children who need shelter when abused or driven into poverty, and that the right to housing be recognized. The fact is that more women and children are turned away than are accommodated when they arrive at shelters in need every single day. During the last 4 years, the situation has become worse, not better, according to the Snapshot Day findings of Women's Shelter Canada. The failure to uphold rights is a daily living nightmare, which no empty words or insincere apologies from the powers that be can erase or excuse. Indigenous women, women with disabilities, and LGBTQ people report the greatest level of violence. Thanks to their fight, all of us together are becoming more effective, but even the inadequate measures in place are being cut. We also march today to demand that Canada stop using violence against the people of other countries. As women, we've always played a role, a very important role, in demanding that Canada take a stand for peace. Today, when Canada is appeasing US aggression, actively taking a part in imposing crippling sanctions on countries that don't submit to US dictate, which are responsible for death and suffering, especially of the children who are most affected, our work is all the more important. We're marching, as Marin said, in the midst of the federal election, when we're told that the issue is which leader vying for power we should trust. In a recent poll, a majority of Canadians said they don't think that those vying for power care about the problems of working people in Canada or of the Indigenous peoples. The response to this was to berate the people for being populist. Yet everywhere, people are demanding the recognition of the rights of all and democratic renewal based on the recognition of those rights. So when we say, when we say whose rights, our rights, whose streets, our streets, whose future, our future, whose bodies, our bodies, we're affirming the most important right, the right to decide. Let's see if I can put this back. If you want me to be done? I'm not quite done yet. Whether we speak of Indigenous people and Canadians standing together demanding an end to colonial justice and affirming the inherent rights of Indigenous people, or the youth demanding action to defend Mother Earth, and in their words, they say, we're rising like the oceans. The workers saying no to Bill 9 and the attacks on their right to negotiate their living and working conditions. The fight to end human trafficking and provide full status on arrival for all migrant workers. Our no to all forms of racism, LGBTQ phobias, and misogyny.
And invisible disabilities, they're being denied as well when it comes to work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Through our collective resistance, by speaking in our own voice, by raising all the matters of concern, our matters of concern, the concern to us, we empower ourselves now. By doing so, we're tackling the issue of how to establish a real hold on political and economic power, to become the decision makers, to create the society we need, so all human beings can flourish. In this election and after, it's important that we together continue to speak out and raise our concerns through our forums and other actions in which we participate. Let's once again show what we're made of. And let's once again, I have to deviate a bit from my speech because in speaking before this to Kathy and April Eve, I think one of the things that really came out is the need for all of us to show up, and not just to show up, but to speak to our neighbors, our co-workers, our families and friends, and bring them with us. And in real life, to take that stand with the Indigenous women, that this violence against Indigenous women, girls and boys must stop. And that we're together in that fight, and it's our responsibility. So in closing, I just want to say, take back the night. Whose future?
Our future.
Whose rights?
Our rights.
Whose bodies?
Our bodies.
Who decides?
We decide.
Who decides?
We decide.
Thank you.